What did your parents teach you that you had to unlearn? Your grades are the only thing that matters. For my whole life I was taught this. And for the most part, until the end of high school, I was able to get good grades effortless. I did quite well on standardized tests and got away with blowing off a lot of homework for school. My parents weren't happy with this because if you put in more effort you could get straight A's. My dad called my 33 act score pathetic, so it was pretty much ingrained in my brain that I wasn't good enough. A bunch of my cousins were great students that ended up going to prestigious colleges, Ivy League and such, so I was always compared to them and treated like a failure. Once I myself got to college I couldn't handle it and ended up failing out. After that happened I was dangerously close to being suicidal for a while. If I have terrible grades then I might as well be nothing, right? I ended up getting a job where I've been moving up pretty fast. Every time I talk to my parents they keep telling me that I won't amount to anything without a degree, but I make about as much right now as my friends who recently graduated. I know they aren't 100% wrong, but they definitely aren't 100% right. Edit. Another little tidbit. I once, and only once, truly opened up to my dad about my emotions. My twin brother got into a relationship before I did, and it made me feel inadequate or inferior. He told me that the best way to attract a woman is to just focus on studying and keep up my grades. Like, what the fuck is that? My mom is a very shy, non-social, passive person who has always had terrible self-esteem. She prides herself on not having needs and being the person who is okay with anything no matter what. Of course, none of this is actually true. She merely doesn't directly ask for her needs. You find out what her needs were over a long period of passive-aggressive behavior. When I was growing up, she wanted to instill in me the idea that I would always let others' needs go ahead of my own, and that I shouldn't stand out ever, always fading into the background, so I don't get in the important people's way. She'd often say, off the cuff, you wouldn't want anyone noticing you, you wouldn't want to get in someone else's way, murder_kitty doesn't need anything, or you don't want to be a bother. She believed she was instilling wisdom by telling me that all clothes I wear, I'm a woman, should be neutral colors, too big, and nothing that would make anybody notice me. Nothing could be exposed above the elbows or knees, or below the clavicle, or I would get nasty comments from her. Looking back as an adult, I recognized that she was probably trying to protect me, but it really faked me up well into my 20s. I didn't wear a single article of clothing that was flattering, fun, or fashionable until I was 23. Besides the clothes thing, this resulted in having terrible self-esteem throughout my teen years and early 20s, especially about my body, dating, allowing myself to spend money on frivolous things once in a while, and most importantly, learning to take up space in the world. It's a good thing to directly state your needs, to say I don't want that, to stop caring what others think about you and how in the way you supposedly are, and to put yourself first most of the time. I now realize that the people who are passively putting others first are very mentally and sometimes physically unhealthy people who are, ironically, creating a bigger burden on people by not caring for themselves. Being passive aggressive. My mum is the worst at that, and I used to follow in her steps until a friend told me I was doing it. Now I'm trying to retrain my mum. It does not work. I go to visit my parents, and let's say my mum wants me to help her out doing something. If she doesn't ask clearly, I won't help. Because if I do she will be like, no, don't worry, I can do it. But if I don't she will be heavily citing, walking all around the place like she is busy and has so much work to do, looking at me meanly. I would be like, do you need help? She would just answer, no, I'm fine. Well, if you're fine that's fine for me too. I hate when she does that. How hard is it just to ask? She wants my sisters, my dad and me just to guess what she wants. And we are so used to it that we just know. But I'm not acting on it anymore. I see my sisters being pissed off at me, but not saying anything. They're as much passive aggressive as my mum. Of course I'll have mail later, or when we are talking on the phone a few days later, she will hint that she's angry at me. But it's over. I have decided that if they want anything, they can ask. If I need anything, that's what I do now. It's so much easier as well. I never feel angry at people for stupid things anymore. Of course people aren't mind readers, edit, because some answers I've got really start annoying me. No, I'm not myself being passive aggressive. I tell her quite often that she could just ask. I do the dishes and clean the table after eating. Of course I do that. And if there's a dinner, I will help her prepare it, of course. But I haven't lived in that house for nearly 15 years now. So when I come to visit, no, it's not always obvious that I should do some specific chores unless my mother explains to me what she wants. If she says in October that she'll needs to buy a new dress to wear for Christmas, I don't straight away assume that she wants me to drive her 50 kilometers to do some shopping because my parents live in the middle of nowhere, or like I explained in one of my replies, it's not because there are 5 kilos of carrots in the garage that I should assume that she wants me to help her clean them. Then cut them off to store in the freezer right after I have traveled 2 hours to visit her. No, if I visit, I don't tend to assume it is to do chores. And I'm certainly not going to willingly guess it if she's not going to ask properly. It took a lot of soul searching on my part to realize that getting a degree from a prestigious university and getting a ridiculously high paying job is not the only path to happiness, and that I'm allowed to make happiness my number one priority. I was raised to believe that I would be a complete failure if I didn't go to university right after high school and make as much money as possible. Taking a gap year was not an option. Going to trade school was not an option. Money came before happiness. Because money would lead to happiness, I ended up dropping out. My family disowned me. I beat myself up, thinking I'd never amount to anything. I fought through the worst depression I'd ever experienced and worked many short-lived jobs over the course of 5 years. Until, by pure coincidence, I stumbled upon my true calling in life. I took what was supposed to be a temporary job at my local animal shelter. Within the first week I knew it was what I was meant to do. I've worked there for 2 years now. I come home covered in puke, pup, and blood every day. I cry for those animals almost every day. I only make $8 an hour. But I would do my job for free. And I absolutely love every second of it. I might struggle financially at times, but I'm happy. And that's all that matters. I still have to unlearn the following things. Putting yourself first is normal. I never learned to listen to my needs or interests, and it's hurting my ability to do anything. That perfection is the expected standard. I never received compliments for anything I did or was in my life. Only criticism, often unwarranted or unfair. Only when I did nothing wrong. I heard nothing. Letting out emotions is bad. One of the punishable offenses in the household was to be too emotional, which also means you're getting a bit louder due to cheers or frustration. That contributed to me swallowing every single emotion and hold it in for about 20 years now, and it made me a mess. I can't control it anymore. It's either 0 or 11, and it makes socializing impossible. The therapists and psychologists I talked to told me that chances are I will never recover because I was never able to experience a normal and healthy state, so I can't find the medium on my own, and because I don't have any contacts left anymore, no one can help me either. Don't fight back and just pick up the pieces later. This policy is right now ruining me financially, but everything runs over my mom's name, so I can't say anything about it. Bureaucracy at its finest. Basically anything that my father was supposed to teach me. He left my mom when I was 6, and the 2 following boyfriends of hers abused me regularly, while my mom turned a blind eye on it all. I lost the ability to trust anyone or to feel safe anywhere, not even at home. There are probably a few other things, but those are the major points that I need to change, but probably never be able to. Hitting people/partners upside the head was okay, and even funny. Not saying what you mean. This one is still hard, because it still comes out in little things like, can I steal a cookie real quick? Instead of can I try one of your cookies? I've been learning how important word choice is. It's hard. Money management. God, I have no idea how I'm going to fix this one, but I'd better learn it soon. Buying gifts for people, because everyone needs to have something to unwrap on Christmas/their birthday/whatever, even if I couldn't actually afford it. Passive aggressive behavior instead of actual communication. Eating when you're upset. Also, that if I eat when I'm upset I'll end up obese like them, and life won't really be worth living, because being fat is worse than hell. I had to go to therapy for the eating disorder that came from this logic. Thanks, Mom and Dad. Being judgmental. My mother comments on everything and everyone. Why is she dressed like a yeti? He looks like a puppet. X thing is so stupid etc. #selfefestemmissus. For both me and her, overreacting. Again, my mother. It has gotten especially bad when she drives lately, where every single time I'm in the car with her she is yelling, "You have a stop sign, idiot." Mom, he wasn't moving, I have the right of way. He was letting you go. Mom, I swear it's a full moon, because people are driving like crazy. Look at that. They just made a left turn. Mom, it's fine, get off my ass. They are giving you a lot of space and going slower than you. Mom, they aren't near your bumper. It never ends on the note of driving. My parents have also constantly reminded me that driving is the most dangerous, terrifying thing I will ever do in my life. Also showering alone, cooking, riding my bike, and walking down the sidewalk, but I've gotten past those. They taught me that a child will dart into the road and someone will run that red light and people will never look before merging or crossing the road, and oh my god, you're going to hit something. This may sound like a good thing, like defensive driving, but being told your entire life that you will be in control of a metal death trap, you will be responsible for everyone's life if they are on the road, anyone in your car, the life of strangers, and being told that everyone will always try to hit you, or get run over, or cause an accident. It wasn't until recently that I've been able to get behind a wheel without having a panic attack. Don't teach your kids that they are going to kill someone. Just make sure they know to pay attention, because if you tell them they will be responsible for the death of a child every week since they were a child, it'll fuck them up. It'll really fuck them up. Don't make your kid too scared to perform a necessity in society, especially if you choose to live in a suburb 3 miles from the nearest bus stop point. My driving test is in February. Wish me luck on not killing myself, the test giver, anyone in a parking lot, on the road, on the sidewalk, or 2,000 miles away, somehow. Also that I pass. That I'm not smart. My family thinks I have book smart, but not street smart. What I have is ADHD that went untreated, so I was not mentally present for a lot. So yes, I could focus on something in classes when I had to be forced to, but I had difficulty with remembering details about people. So instead of addressing a problem I obviously had, they would have rather discussed my limited chances of surviving in the real world. I now live with roommates in the opposite side of town from them at the age of 25, while my 29-year-old brother carpools with mom with her car and lives in her, smaller than mine, apartment. Not that I'm bitter, after being told I take up too much space and had to move out at around 16, that no one, including my own family, would ever be able to love me because I was not normal. I'm weird, but weird in the same way that everyone is. We all have quirks and can become passionate about things that others may not care about. My passion is science and animals. I'm in the process of becoming a licensed vet tech and already hold a bachelor's degree in high school science, biology, physics and chemistry for grades 7 to 12. My roommates have only known me for about a year, but they care about me in ways that I never thought someone would. They help me realize that my family is weird, not me. And, last one, I swear that you never know when you will be left on your own, so you will have to learn how to survive. As a kid I was big on hiding food for later in case everyone left and forgot me or tried to abandon me. This led to eating what you could when you could. I'm eating healthier and working on correct portion sizes. I work out and can easily, I'm oddly proud about this, lift a 75 to 80 pound dog onto an exam table and restrain them for exams. Fundamentalist Christianity, though I feel looming, but what if they are right? Terror of a punitive god every day and nothing really helps. It's trapped in there, and I fucking hate it, because I can't believe it, nor can I get truly free from it. 20-something years of conditioning is not easily erased, just because the ideas stopped making sense. It buries itself in the body. It's hiding out in muscles and tendons and nerves. The body believes in spite of the mind's departure. The mind can inject messages into the body, but it could take another 20 something years to really be free. There are moments, though, point in the glimmers of freedom from the terror of a god who punishes, wells up another terror of needing to figure out a way to live on or crack the code of existence before death comes. I hate the idea that someday I don't get to be alive anymore. I think and hope there is a purpose to my life, and my heart aches to know it, so that I may die for something that I can smile about, even when I'm moments away from being dirt. And if death is not the end, a purpose that, no matter where I find myself, after dying I can know that, even if the afterlife is total unimaginable suffering, I served something in life that took away the suffering of others. I want to head into the worst case afterlife scenario, like a demon eats my soul or something, knowing I fed someone, or caused people to sing and dance. That I served the energies of life and liveliness. So I can look at the demon about to eat my soul, and feel like I've already won. If it was movie-esque I would say something like, the living lived more because of me, demon. Nothing you do can destroy the seeds of life I planted each day. My single life perishing, my suffering, only nurtures my seeds of creation in the living world. My mother had all sorts of unhealthy lessons to teach about food. She blamed me for her weight gain after she was pregnant with me, so my whole life growing up she was dieting and trying to lose it. She told me, when I was in my preteens, that my underweight BMI was her goal weight, 80 to 90 pounds about, completely unrealistic IMO. Anyway, she had no idea about portion control. She insisted that every dinner consist of a meat, a starch, and a vegetable, which isn't bad, until you consider that they all came in fairly sizable amounts. She kind of went the restaurant way of things in that respect, and then complained morosely from time to time when she couldn't lose weight. My brother and I had hollow legs, so it didn't affect us. At least, not until his metabolism slowed early, and my poor understanding of portions led to rapid weight gain when I was about 24. I've had to learn the actual size of my stomach, since my dinners consist of smaller meat portions and maybe a veggie side, like a quarter cup of frozen peas warmed in the microwave or a small potato's worth of mashed potatoes. That is actually enough for a girl of my size, and I don't need huge servings to survive. She also had unhealthy opinions on food waste. Given these large portions, there would oftentimes be wasted food left over on my plate. Would get so angry if she saw me scrape it into the trash, and would bitch about starving kids in Africa, how I was wasting my father's money, that people were going to think they didn't feed me if I got any skinnier, etc, and on and on. Nowadays I'm just like, bitch, this is why you're fat, as I have learned that I don't have to eat every single morsel on my plate to feel satisfied. Even if there's like a bite or two of burger left, I can throw that shit in the trash if my body's giving me signals that I'm done. I don't need what I don't need. Another one is that I don't have to eat what I don't like to gain sufficient nutrition. She was always after me about being fussy about veggies, and I didn't like mushrooms but everyone else did, so they'd find their way into everything, so heck yeah I'd pick them out. I also don't like the skins on green or yellow beans, onions, or a lot of the stuff in Chinese food, bok choy and those bean sprout things, because of the texture. But there are plenty of other vegetables and other foods that I do like: peas, corn, carrots, broccoli, potatoes, spring mix salads, stuff like that. I enjoy tomato sauces and ketchup, but I don't like tomatoes themselves. They are too mushy and weird. I enjoy roasted red pepper soups and red pepper hummus and spreads, but not peppers themselves. I don't like most onions, but I enjoy chives, so I grow them and use them in every dish I want to get fancy with. My solution to sauces is to just blend it, so I don't get turned off by chunks and their texture. A lot of the vegetables I like are more often found in a stir fry than in a sandwich, lettuce being the exception of course, which seems a little weird to people, but it doesn't mean I'm going to keel over from malnutrition, that's for damn sure. I guess the lesson here is that I'm not that overly fussy of a person, and I'm actually pretty adventurous with my food. When you look at the bigger picture, I love sushi, and that I'm nutritionally healthy in my eating habits despite what she might think. A little late, but I saw this post and I just needed to vent a little here. Point background. I'm 22 and I'm the first in my family to go to university. First generation as both parents are immigrants. Here's a list of things I grew up with that I'm trying to grow over. Being older means you are always correct. I got pushed against a wall once when I was 17 because I told my uncle he was lying about something. He said I was being disrespectful and my sister followed by saying you don't question your elders as they are never wrong. Go to school, get a job, start making money, and it doesn't matter whether you like it or not, as long as you are making money. In my family, no one has. They come from a third world country, so in their defense they never had the opportunity to. Aspirations. No one has dreams. It's all, get a job and work the rest of your life, and when you're bored just drink with your family. Forgive because they're your family. No, absolutely not. I'm not going to pretend you're a sweet person when in fact you're a piece of shit. I had an uncle who took me to a bar. I was visiting my family's country of origin, and I watched him for 6 hours sit there and drink over 10 beers with his friends. I also don't drink because well my family has drinking issues. He also expected to drive me back, but it's okay because that's his lifestyle and he's my family, so I have to forgive and forget. No, fuck that. You're an inconsiderate as whole point. No matter what you're doing, you have to drop everything in your schedule to be with your family. I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a college semester in which I'm taking 18 credits between 7 classes because I'm a double major, and you want me to drop everything I'm doing whilst I'm studying for midterms because you want me to fly halfway across the country to take care of our mother who is perfectly fine and healthy and has nothing debilitating affecting her and has a husband by her side. Yet you make me feel like a piece of crap for putting my education first. You're a bitch, Iris. At least you were. You're a lot better now. This pissed me off the most, and I'm happy I'm slowly getting over this. You can't study medicine because studying medicine is for the rich, so you should stick to something that will get you a job the quickest. No, absolutely not. I have dreams, and I want to give my life up for the betterment of others. I'm sorry you had no aspirations and you chose to work as a waitress for the past 30 years. Don't demean my dreams, and don't you dare limit me. I feel so much better after writing this. I want to say I do love my family. They have had their very bad moments with me, but I do love them. Have a good night, Reddit. I'm clocking out. Correcting grammar. I had no idea people didn't like to learn they were using a word or sentence structure incorrectly. My mom was an English teacher and my dad a lawyer who loved language. They instilled this in me at an early age. I'm grateful they did, because I took the SAT 2 times and both times I got a perfect English score. Math on the other hand, not so much. I learned that people actually hate to be corrected. It took a long time. It took longer for the reflex to stop. I still grind my teeth a bit when someone ends a sentence with a preposition. But I learned that the language is owned by its speakers. If you're writing a professional document, paper, or letter, it should be more grammatically sound. But when speaking, it's an evolving language. My wife's family is from Western Pennsylvania. The entire area has this interesting linguistic habit of dropping the infinitive form of a verb after need, want, or like, and instead using the past participle. They say the kids need bathed, or the baby wants fed, or my personal favorite, the cat likes petted. In the first example they aren't saying bathed, they are saying bathed, which also would have made me crazy just 10 years ago. My wife literally can't help it. It's the way language was used in her entire family. And I have to say, it's an easy lazy habit to get into. It rolls off the tongue. I only use this construction when I'm around her family. It used to make me crazy, and I've seen my parents struggle to keep from correcting everyone in her family when they are visiting with us. I actually had to tell them to stop the first time. They didn't even understand why I was asking. I don't know if they even know they do it. But it made them sound like pretentious shats, and they really aren't. They both just have the same weird hang up about language. It needs mentioned. See what I did there? That every time I tell my wife that I actually enjoy that part of the dialect where she is from, she thinks I'm making fun of her or her family. Even though I speak like that around her family all the time now. My father is straight over the border Mexican. He was smart and knocked up/married the first white lady he hooked up with. Thus, I was born. My mom was in love with Mexico and self-taught herself the language. I heard more Spanish from my mother than my dad. She helped non-English speaking friends apply for work and fill out forms. She spoke emphatically with all Mexican family members on the phone and insisted we visit Mexico every 4 to 5 years to keep connected. It was amazing how much vocabulary I picked up, but I was always too shy to talk to my extended family. Grandpa made a huge statement that before he died he would live to have a conversation with his American grandchildren. Cut to me in my 4th year in college trying to make my Mexican family proud by foregoing a theater major and majoring in Spanish. Since oral skills is your finals in all classes up to 301, each white teacher passes me with a B, telling me I speak great Spanish. But the conjugation is a little off. The problem is that she spoke purely in infinitives. She never conjugated a faking thing, so I have no idea how to speak in past participle. It was like trudging through sand. Everything that sounded right was completely wrong. I had to completely unlearn auditory instincts. Unfortunately it was too late. You know what Spanish 401 is? Reading and writing essays about the books that jump from the past, present, and future. Fuck me. I take the only grammar class 3 times, but drop out each time as we only spend the first 2 weeks on what I need. Then they speed it up. I ask my advisors what I should do. They say study abroad. I ask what program continues to pay my bills as I'm working 2 jobs to be here. They shrugged. I drop out. The most hilarious thing was by the time I was confident to speak in front of my family, my grandfather was deaf and a little nuts. I didn't feel completely defeated as my other extended family said I spoke very well. Turns out dirt farmers don't give a fuck about subjectives. From mom that I have to eat a large portion of food for dinner until I'm completely stuffed. I'm having to relearn how to eat. Instead of seeing that it's 7 o'clock and crazing a carb-heavy super-filling meal, I'm forcing myself to get a small portion of food when I'm very hungry, whenever that is, drink a glass of water, wait a little bit, and then get seconds if I'm still hungry. That love is the most important thing in a relationship and everything else should be worked through. All through high school I watched her date a manipulative, emotionally abusive, controlling man-child. Then she was shocked when I also dated a manipulative, emotionally abusive, controlling man-child and ignored her when she said to break up with him. She really modeled that you should forgive abusive behavior because love, and it faked me up. From dad that repressing emotions and being cold and closed off is a good way to deal with unpleasant feelings or situations. It drives me crazy and everyone close to me as well that I'm so much like him in this way. We don't discuss problems. We either find a possible solution on our own or cut and run. End of story. I'm having to relearn how to cope in a way that doesn't involve emotional isolation and shutting people out. I often will eventually talk about a seriously traumatic or hard thing, but only after a crazy amount of time has passed and in a flippant manner that deters probing. That doing anything that wasn't a planned, frequent event was stressful and ultimately not worth it. My parents were incredibly over the top restrictive when it came to doing anything unstructured or doing something without prior warning, that is seeing friends, rather than say going to swimming club, martial arts, scouts, music lessons, which I was grateful for. Just sometimes I wanted to meet up with friends and laugh and talk. And even talk to girls, God forbid. A lengthy grilling on who, what, where, when and why would follow any request to be social, and it would cause both them and me so much stress that I eventually just stopped trying. I appreciated that the world could be a scary place, but I didn't understand until much later in life that being the oldest and my parents being equal parts lazy, antisocial and clinically OCD, the last just my dad, was the cause of this. Not the standard thinking of a parent. It was only when I went to university in a different town that I realized that doing fun and spontaneous stuff with friends could actually be achieved entirely without the negative balance of anxiety, stress, arguments, structures, and limitations that had always preceded. This was one of my greatest revelations and changed my life. Of course now I have a career and a girlfriend who also has some issues with deviating from plans. I'm less able to do those things, but at least I have done them, and, to a degree, I'm imposing that structure on myself for a rational reason. My dad still worries unnecessarily. For example, every single time I cough just once, even just to clear my throat, be it over the phone, or when I see him, he always has to say, "Oh, you've still got that cough. You should get it checked out. Don't do too much." I might not have been ill for a year or more, but guaranteed, one cough and that's the response I get. I had to unlearn the idea that I need them for everything. I had a very controlling step-parent, and as a result, I learned that power is always right. I've come to find that this is a very bad thing to go through life with. It makes it seem like every emotion or opinion you have is invalid until someone comes along and validates it. I was taught that everything I do is wrong and abnormal. The other thing I had to unlearn was this idea that I couldn't make it on my own. My stepmom would discourage me from moving out of their house, even in my early 20s, because she thought I was too sheltered and that I had no idea how hard it would be to pay bills. She gave me the impression that I have no idea how hard life will be, that there will be so many unforeseen, miserable surprises. Paying rent and utilities and insurance was just going to be too hard for me because of all of the things that no one is going to tell me about. At least, that's what I was led to believe, so I might as well just stay at home, since she and my father make life so easy for me. Eventually, I couldn't take living at home anymore. There was lots of abuse, fighting, vitriol, drinking, stress, so I moved out. And guess what? Life actually turned out to be easier. All I do is go to work, come home, go to the gym, go out with friends, pay my bills. There's no fighting or screaming or unnecessary stress. I was taught that life would be too hard. Life on my own actually turned out to be easy as pie. This also led me to being too nice and not really asserting myself. This is still something I'm working on, but I have come a long way. I had been walked all over by friends. Family. I let my coworkers and boss walk all over me all because I didn't want to assert myself for fear of making people angry. My parents were never at all hard on me. They were very rarely encouraging and had little to no involvement in my education or personal life. I'm not saying that they were bad parents. They split when I was 10, and I'll admit that they had their problems. Well, maybe a lot of problems. In a way, they gave me too much freedom because they were both wrapped up in their personal lives. My mum provided for me well but never really invested herself emotionally. My dad was narcissistic and he had a temper, so approaching him about things was never really an option. Whenever I tried to get help for school, they'd always tell me to just do what you need to. This was when I was maybe around 8 or 9, so their lack of encouragement and support really set me back. They were never hard on me or strict, which was good for me, until the novelty wore off, and I realized that I'd done fuck all with my time. They never pushed me to study, and never pushed me to complete assignments, or take part in out-of-school activities. Both of them hated their jobs, and dropped out of school, so I was surrounded by constant negativity surrounding work, school, and college. As a result of them never pushing me, I wasted a lot of my talent because I didn't know how to push myself. They always wanted me to do well but never did anything to help me with that, and only now do I realize how much this has affected me. When I stressed about exams or tests, their response was always just don't worry about it just now. They pretty much let me do anything I wanted for a huge chunk of my life, and this led to me developing some really bad habits. I had to learn how to push myself. I had to learn how to be strict with myself. And I had to learn how to do a lot of things on my own. Fortunately now, I have more of a structure to my life, but it really does anger me that they never really involved themselves in my education. I don't know if this even makes any sense. I haven't really unlearned anything from my childhood yet, and that's not necessarily a good thing, since I developed a number of bad habits with my finances and money handling. I do find myself getting better, though. While I was married, I was with a spoiled brat whose parents bought her everything, and that ended up costing me dearly, since I didn't make that much on my own, and she spent more time unemployed than employed during our relationship. That furthered the bad habits I already possessed, and for the longest time I was constantly being hit with overdraft fees, usually 4 or 5 at a time and at least every 3 to 4 weeks. This also dragged down my credit score greatly and left me in debt with a number of companies. Today, I've paid off what's going to be paid off, and the last few remaining debts are actually outside of the lawsuit range and old enough that they are about to drop from my credit score regardless of outstanding balance, so I've been advised to simply let it take its course at this point. My credit score is going to begin to climb naturally and put me in a position where I can afford to do something to actively repair it. Meanwhile, I do find I consistently have more money in my account, and although I do still like buying my toys and eating out from time to time, I don't do it nearly as often now, and I better regulate and limit my spending, so I regularly have an abundance of cash and I don't have to check my account and count the dollars every time I go out to do something. They told me, if I'm really nice to everyone and just be patient, I'll be successful. Point being, really nice just ended up me getting bullied and not respected much by my peers, because killing them with kindness rather than standing up for yourself is how you become a wimp. If I ever stood up for myself, they'll either wonder if I deserved it or if I was being too mean. Point, there's nothing wrong with being patient, but my parents are the world's most patient people. Example, if it's been over 45 minutes and they haven't gotten their food, they'll say just be patient and wait, it'll be worth it. And being a bit cross with the restaurant is not an option either, because it violates the first rule I brought up earlier. If I try to speed up the process, such as trying to work harder to achieve my goals, I'm automatically impatient or setting myself up to make lots of mistakes. Jokes on them. I talked to a military recruiter that's a family friend and told me to stand up for myself if I think it's right. When trying to figure what to do for myself, he also told me to not be afraid of just going for it, because if I keep being patient by waiting more, by saying what if, I'll be in the same place 4 years later saying the same thing, just be patient and wait, it'll be worth it. By the time 4 years would have gone by, I would already done an enlistment. TLDR. Here I'm today. I'm about to join the US Army as an officer. Slow and steady always wins the race is complete bullshit. Growing up, both my parents were extremely negative in their attitudes and their outlook. Extremely pessimistic and apathetic. My mother always says she cares about us because we, my sister and I, are her children, but she only ever antagonizes everyone in the house. She always fishes for favors, and when we refuse she tries to guilt trip us. She is never grateful and always feels entitled. She always believes she knows best. Everything is always about money with her. She was never able to hold down a job for extended periods of time because her personality would just grate upon her colleagues. My father may not have left my family, but he was basically absent in spirit. In 30 years of life, I have never had a proper conversation with him. We've never embraced or laughed together. He is extremely narrow-minded and selfish, never thinking about others. This he exhibits by how he always ruins other people's property, that is, throws out your mail. We had this fake Christmas tree that my cousin gifted to my family when we were young children. We kept it for decades, always taking it out during the holidays. When the holidays passed, we would fold it up and store it in my closet in my room. A few years ago, for no apparent reason, he goes into my closet and throws out the tree and all the ornaments. He also forced me to give up my adopted husky after only having had him for a little over a month, because he refused to take care of it despite he was about to retire. That was truly one of the saddest days of my life. I cannot wait to leave them in my dust. I honestly believe the two of them have only been together this long because both knew neither would survive alone. They are miserable people that deserve only each other. What I've learned is how not to be a parent. I honestly look forward to the day that I have a child of my own, so that I can impart to them all the love that my family never provided me. A quick temper. My mom was a very sweet and loving person, but if something was messed up or we did something bad, it was immediate yelling at the top of her lungs, followed by snarky remarks for the next hour or so. So once I got older, I developed these same habits. If something annoys me or goes wrong, I can feel the anger start to bubble up inside me. When I was with my ex-wife, this led to many an all-out screaming fights followed by snarky remarks for the rest of the evening. When we divorced, I took a long hard look at myself and decided to try and fix some of my biggest flaws. The hardest one to tackle has been this anger issue. I just want to yell at people when they do something stupid. Now I can suppress the anger in most cases, and if I can't, then I just walk away to compose myself. My fiance has told me that I'm the calmest person she has ever met. It has been a long fought battle that I continue to fight, but at least I made progress. I'm still looking for a way to release the anger. Bottling it up and not having a way to relax can't be healthy in the long term. Right now I assemble Lego sets at the end of the day to relax and calm down. If I had a particularly bad event that made me angry, but that sheet is expensive. Almost everything. My many posts in r/Ray said be narcissists. My mother is the abuser. She's a violent, manipulative, malignant narcissist. My father worked 16 hours a day keeping the farming business running, and she was always careful to play normal mom when he was around. He's a good man, worked hard, and it really sucks now that I don't call or visit because mom is still there. Although it's hardly a marriage anymore, more like a business relationship, but it still sucks that my dad has to suffer with little to no contact simply because my bio mother decided she would rather rule my every waking moment with an iron fist and beat the crap out of me. It's a hard sell today. Women, especially mothers, are rarely the abusers and almost never target their own children, especially female children. The worst parts weren't the physical violence, it's the psychological conditioning she put me through. Nothing was ever good enough. Any achievement wasn't because I did well, only because of her support, or because she approved of my partaking in the activity. She insisted I was a difficult child with an authority problem. Meanwhile, she changed rules every day and flew off the handle at the drop of the hat, often forcing me to spend hours listening to her rants, which were filled with rhetoric and vitriol of how terrible of a child I was. Went to college, graduated with honors, still not good enough. Moved to a nice town, got a decent job, still a failure. Joined the army, and have a thriving career. Apparently I'm just dumb cannon fodder now. I work a desk job. This led to a series of increasingly abusive adult relationships which eventually culminated in what I call the Hindenburg in 2013. After that I went to therapy for over 2 years. It took 4 different kinds of counseling before it finally stood in my head that I'm in control, and any success I have now is not a reflection of her parenting. It's in spite of it. I have amazing friends and colleagues, a great career, and I live in a beautiful place far away from my mother. Even if it does all go to hell and I fail miserably, at least it's on my terms and not hers. Gonna start off by saying I love both my parents dearly, apologizing in advance. Table manners. My first fancy date at a nice restaurant, I had to ask my boyfriend to cut my meat because I didn't know how. I always just stabbed what I had with a fork and ate off it. My dad even told me finger lickers were fine, putting your finger in the dessert bowl and literally licking your fingers. In their defense, when I confronted them about it, they said, "Whoops, we thought you knew that was only okay at home." Boyfriends shouldn't abuse you. Dating them doesn't give them a free pass. I told my parents and the police once about a boy I was dating and how he was telling me what to wear, how he grabbed me without consent, etc. However, I didn't tell them I was dating him because I'd been keeping it secret. I wasn't supposed to date for another couple years. When they found out we were together, they dismissed it, and for a long time I thought that whatever a guy did to me, even if I wasn't into it, if we were dating, then I was partially to blame. Making someone earn your trust back is faked up. I'm not saying trust can't be broken, but when I lied to my mom about dating a guy, previous ex, she told me I now had to work to earn her trust back, and it might take a couple years for her to trust me again. Why did that screw me up? It felt like she was withholding love. Trust is something you give to people, and while it is earned, it can't be measured like that. If someone breaks your trust, sure, you might be wary of them for a while, but the whole "it'll be a few years, give or take, depends on how honest you are" was pretty screwed up. I make sure I don't do that with people who hurt me. That a college degree and a solid education wasn't necessary. Mostly from my dad. I pretty much didn't engage in school at all and went through a slew of minimum wage jobs before I realized that what worked for him would not work for me. I think he realized that too, but far too late. It took my brother turning to dealing drugs from a failed sports career and a lot more failure after the economic crash for him to realize that he got exceptionally lucky to be able to send two kids through private school, own a brand new car for about 5 consecutive years, and have a house in the wealthiest part of the country. I realized a while ago he's probably dyslexic and just hides it very well from people. He can't spell worth a damn, and I'm not altogether convinced he can read at the same speed as most people do. So that, coupled with a complete lack of degree or any real experience, it's a massive stroke of luck and hard work he rose to the positions he got to. Mind you, they were all sales director positions effectively. He's worked incredibly hard, but it was quite difficult to convince him that effectively lightning can't strike 3 times. If you've seen the documentary Trophy Kids, that was pretty much my childhood, except my brother was exceptionally gifted physically, and I was below average in regards to physical disposition, I guess you could say. It ultimately ended in tears, because we placed our faith in little more than blind luck. My parents always supported us though. I finish my bachelor's and CS next year and I'd like to think things will turn around then. At the least I've proved to myself that in the right circumstances I could have done well. It's been a hard lesson for all of us, but it's taught me that there's a big difference between wanting the best for your kids and actually knowing what's best for your kids. How you achieve the latter is something incredibly important that each parent should plan out and not just leave to the winds of fate. All that said, they were both amazing parents, but like everyone, they are real people with real faults just doing their best. That fun has value in life. My father is a hyper successful rags to riches type. My mother is decent close to riches. They own vacation homes and spend all their time at their vacation home doing work on the vacation home instead of just sitting back and having a cold one and reading a book every once in a while. They scoff at leisure and relaxation, citing it and lazy, and blew a fuse when I spent $400 on a 4-day vacation for 2 to Tofino with my girlfriend. And that is a damn cheap vacation considering we were staying in a full 1-bedroom, 1-bath, full kitchen suite. I have numerous low-cost hobbies, and I'm almost done a university program that offers a pretty good chance of getting a job right off the bat. When I meet on these hobbies to my father, he loses it, lecturing about how I should be spending my time doing useful things. I know how to do a lot of stuff, from changing spark plugs to replaying a circuit breaker or carving new crown moldings when the old ones fall off. Yet I was raised in a house where that simply isn't enough, and that time spent building model trains, reading books, or backpacking for a few days is time wasted. Frustratingly, my girlfriend comes from the other end, where they call an electrician if a light bulb burns out, or a plumber for a leaky tap. It has certainly taught me the importance of moderation. That you can't really stop authority figures from wronging you. Only hope that another authority figure steps in. I'm what you call double gifted, which is a pleasant way of saying that I'm both mentally ill and really freaking smart. I would have been in the gifted program in 3rd grade, the earliest it starts at, if not for teachers who didn't realize that I put 0 effort into any work I did and still did great. Thankfully, my parents convinced them to put me in the gifted program in 4th grade. That was, ultimately, a mistake. The gifted program is largely built on cramming. However, the teachers also never deviate from their lesson plan, even if said lesson plan relies on something you were supposed to learn last year, but didn't because you were at another school. My 4th grade math teacher expected me to know long division, but I had no idea how to do regular division. That was somehow my problem, despite the fact that I had 0 control over what I was taught and what school I went to. Being 9. Eventually, the stress built up too much, to the point that I was having bowel issues, which caused me to take half-hour bathroom breaks. I always had trouble with that, but stress makes it far worse, which caused me to miss the instructions, which caused me to fail the class walk, which made me even more stressed. I was quickly shunted back into the regular school for 4th grade, but the damage had been done, and I was struggling with things that should have been simple. 5th grade was where it all came to a head. Because I was doing worse and worse, I was put into a new school, one with a special needs classroom. There was no pressure. I was given tons of privacy. Each desk was contained in a little cubicle. I was completely unchallenged, and the room was always either dead quiet or filled with screaming. That was the only time I have, as far as I can remember, hallucinated. It was honestly rather strange, as it was halfway between my imagination running wild and schizophrenia. I had zero control over my imagination, which was conjuring a demon that appeared before me whenever I closed my eyes and constantly taunted me about my inadequacies. The psychiatrist said that the only reason they didn't label me as a schizophrenic is because I was perfectly aware these visions weren't real. Thankfully, 6th grade was rather calm. I was in middle school, one that actually let me learn things instead of forcing me to do the exact same work as kids so autistic they'll most likely never speak more than a single word at a time. The teachers ranged from perfect, my science teacher, who made learning very fun and often let us watch Bill Nye the Science Guy, complete with popcorn, to uninterested but still doing their job right, my history teacher. If it came to a head in 5th grade, it came to the ass in 7th. There are a few things to mention here. My science teacher was an anti-science religious nut, and also ridiculously verbally abusive. If a student so much as sighed, she launched into a screaming tirade against them, about how they'll never amount to anything, and that they're in her faking class, so shut the hell up and stop sighing. Halfway through the year, she wasted an entire period that way simply because, just as she was starting another rant, a kid muttered "Oh, God," and she began screaming to never use God's name in vain, and how we're all going to hell. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I broke down into tears in the middle of class. She then started screaming at me, the kid who was sobbing at her screaming, to stop crying. My drama teacher encouraged us to bully each other. I was seated between 3 kids who had bullied me since grade school. It was 1 guy and 2 girls, with the girls mostly providing backup. The guy verbally sexually harassed me. For those curious, I was a chubby guy. I'm not even attractive. He did it solely because he knew it would make me uncomfortable. The teacher wouldn't move them, and she wouldn't keep them away from me if I moved. When it got too much for me, she told me to read a book. While this did normally calm me down, as I loved reading, it also did nothing to stop their taunts, and I still have trouble reading actual paper books to this day. Furthermore, she literally laughed at me when I tried to get her to do something about it, along with the rest of the class, because homosexual sexual harassment is totally hilarious and not at all emotionally damaging for a guy who could still sing soprano at the time and is now a bass. Lastly, she actively gave me help returning taunts. I once saw an opportunity to get some form of revenge. The bullies were supposed to put on a play featuring an infant, and I suggested the leader would make a great baby, and she helped me get away with it. All that sheet combined was making me miserable, and my parents couldn't get the school to do anything, which gave me a habit of repressing everything painful. Simply because it was the only way to not be completely miserable. I'm still ridiculously forgetful to this day. However, the stress continued to build up until, finally, I started lashing out passively. When it became too much, I left. I didn't care if I wasn't supposed to. Staying in an environment that actively damaged my already fragile mental health was only going to make things far worse, though, at the time, I only cared about getting out of there. This landed me detention, because of course the kid who's super sweet and nice, and gets relatively good grades deserves punishment for walking out on non-stop sexual and verbal harassment that was encouraged and done by a teacher, respectively. The detentions were, of course, a ridiculously oppressive environment where they just handed you several sheets of classwork and homework, then demanded you sit there in silence for several hours. Despite the fact that I spent most of my time in detention sobbing my eyes out until I was dehydrated, I still got all my work done long before my time was up, leaving me with crippling boredom and misery, which are never good combinations. This ultimately left me quite depressed, and I soon began lashing out at everything remotely bad both at school and at home, turning into a complete mess every time my happiness was so much as slighted. I even contemplated suicide once, and nearly attempted it before my apathy won out over my depression. Remember, I was 12 at the time. 12 points. Eventually, it got so bad that my mother begged the school to start suspending me instead of giving me detention. They actually tried to insist that a suspension was worse than detention and that it would go on my permanent record, as if constant detentions weren't just as bad. Thankfully, my mother forced them, and I was allowed to not go back to the place that punished me for retaliating against constant sexual and verbal harassment that they actively allowed to take place. Point after that, I was homeschooled, where my parents found out that I had to relearn about half of everything I was supposed to know because I had been faked far worse by the public school system than they even realized. And they took an active role in ensuring I was getting a good education. To this day, whenever an authority figure is confronting me, I wither. I can't defend myself. I can't explain. I can't even give the real reason. I recently got a speeding ticket for $150. To be fair, I was going 15 miles per hour over the speed limit. However, I'm a delivery boy, and the manager in charge of scheduling has been giving me 2 shifts a week at the crack of god awful even. Though I've let her know that I really can't handle early shifts because I'm not going fast enough, even though she only scheduled a single driver and we had 5 deliverers come in at the exact same time, all in different directions. The only time I can actually explain myself is when I'm the one who starts the confrontation, which is never really going to happen. Being guilt-tripped and seeing your siblings be guilt-tripped your entire childhood is completely normal, and I deserve to be guilt-tripped, and I should feel bad for every single thing I do, even things that I have no reason to feel guilty over. I just jump to irrationally finding a way to be guilty over it. I'm 16 and just moved out from my mother's, so I'm unfortunately still trying to unlearn this. At least I know now. I just have to kick the habit and catch myself when I start to feel guilty for no good reason. Seeing a therapist and taking antidepressants won't help at all. I don't have an anxiety disorder or depression. I'm just shy and introvert like my mom. Luckily, when I was 14 or 15 I became a lot more assertive and kept bugging my parents to take me to my primary, and eventually when I realized things were a lot worse than I was making them out to be, I made my dad take me to the thus leading to inpatient. I'm still very proud of myself for doing that and knowing what I needed for my health, and luckily, because I did this for myself earlier this year, it has led up to my mom realizing a therapist and psychiatrist would help her too. Well, it was half seeing me improve and half her alcoholism getting to a real low point and her getting into inpatient involuntarily 3 times in 2 months. Wanting to work in the entertainment industry is unrealistic, and I should strive for something else, like being a nurse or social worker like some of the people in my family. Realize that I need to do what makes me happy, and being a nurse sure as hell won't do that. Still want to work in entertainment, but also would like to study political science and have that be part of whatever I end up doing. Also going to give a goat farm by the time I'm 35. Edit. Ended last sentence with hopefully and then removed it because I will definitely have a goat farm by then. I was raised by multiple people, so these don't solely apply to one person / pair of parents. I still haven't unlearned these, but basically that 3/4 of your conversations don't have to be bitching and moaning about something, to not be a misanthrope / pessimist, to not be passive aggressive, and to figure out a way to effectively communicate concerns without being an ass. To not hold grudges or immediately suspect that people dislike me, to appreciate the simple things in life, to not view the ultimate end goal of one's life as getting married and having children, to not view oneself as a failure or defective for not attaining or wanting to attain those things. I have always valued talents which don't necessarily lead to financial success. However, I still bear shame and guilt because even to this day I'm told that they are / were ultimately a waste of time and potential. I always felt that my pursuits were insufficient and that they would always be insufficient. To not take a beggars can't be choosers approach toward attaining friendships. To not be constantly distrustful of others or oneself. I'm probably the worst at being stubborn and doing my own thing in life, and later realizing late on in life that certain things they said years ago were right, and I'm still struggling on those things. I'm definitely a learning things the hard way person, and don't like others telling me what to do. Most especially on starting to smoke. One day I'll quit. I know it's very bad, and I don't need any lectures or website links on how bad it is, and that I shouldn't stay up late, but I do anyway. Also maybe I was overambitious when I was younger, but I also had the misguided thought about 10 years ago that I could graduate from a 4-year college and do a little better than just getting a basic 2-year degree from a community college. They recommended the latter, while I thought I could do one step better and get a 4-year degree. The big thing that swayed me to transfer to a 4-year college, even before getting a 2-year community college associate's degree, is that I found one online PDF study online that showed very little money earning difference between a high school education and someone with a 2-year CC degree, and that for the same PDF study it seemed much better to try the 4-year college. Sadly I failed out of that 4-year college. The least they could do is respect my wish to look into apprenticeship programs to become a plumber or electrician. Sigh. I think the fact that I grew up introverted and that I like trying things for myself caught them off guard versus how my brother was like, more going along with their wishes. I was always the opposite and more doing my own things. And probably why they didn't always take me seriously years ago, that is. When I wanted to take honors classes for history in high school and they annoyingly talked me out of it when I truly wanted to do that honors class. I'm sure I'll get better and one day resolve through all of my issues someday. Bad enough as much as I love my parents that I know they didn't properly prepare me for a lot of things I had to learn on my own and that to some extent I still struggle with, that is applying for jobs, how to organize things and that at some point it isn't bad to dump things out, etc. I had to learn that you can't build lasting relations by guilt tripping people into staying with you. My mother is a spineless woman who absolutely cannot live without a man in her life to take care of things in post-divorce. She even looked to her male children to take charge and discipline the others and pay the bills. She spent all of her free time browsing eHarmony every day while we all fended for ourselves. As my siblings grew up we moved out of the house, and every time my mother would cry about everybody leaving her to be alone with no sympathy for those of us who wanted to go live independent adult lives. I still remember comforting my own mother as a 12-year-old because she would cry each night when her most recent date went sour. I would then get her to bed and prepare food for my siblings who needed to eat dinner. The only good thing that came out of that dynamic was the fact that I never felt like I was not loved, because throughout my life my mother has needed me to do basic things like show up, to pay fines on time. In my late teens I tried to date women with the same tactics. I acted like I needed them. I was a selfish maniac who clung to my dates with a sickening dependent attitude. The abandonment of dignity that accompanies that attitude drove me into a suicidal depression, which is what was required for me to learn how dysfunctional that thought process was in my adult life. I have recovered somewhat, but it took years of mentorship and introspection to learn how to have a successful friendship or relationship. When you fail, it's because you never tried hard enough, and failing at something is one of the worst things you could ever do. People in a healthy relationship never let their partners know if they disagree with something, or if their partner does something to upset them. They just ignore the issue hoping it will go away. Mental illness is only real if it's completely and totally obvious to everyone, and the sufferer is completely incapable of functioning in society. Number 1 has taken me the longest to unlearn. It's been tough, but at 26, I'm finally at the point where I realize failure is not the end of the world. Failure can help you. Sometimes you need to learn how not to do something before you can figure it out. Sometimes you need to fail so that you can learn to ask for help. Sometimes shit just happens and there's nothing you can do, so do your best to move on. Number 2 is something my poor husband had to help me work out. Communication is good. You don't always have to agree. Mature adults sit down and figure stuff out together. I still have trouble letting him know how I feel, but I get better every day. Number 3 is something that I'm still bitter about. If I'd known my behavior patterns and thoughts were not just hormones and laziness as a teenager, I could have started managing my mental health way better as an adult. Sure, my symptoms weren't pitchfork waving and screaming at the neighbors crazy, but they sure as hell weren't healthy. To tear apart any plan or idea by listing all the faults first, instead of looking at the strengths and positives. As a result I second guess and find fault in everything I do, say, think, and feel, which obviously isn't a good thing for my confidence or self-esteem. For example, looking for a job, I'll be stressed out from dealing with asshole customers and demanding bosses and unfriendly coworkers, and have to ride slow public transportation to get there, and if I'm late too many times I'll get fired, like I did from my last job, and anyways who'd want to hire me when I've been unemployed for over 2 years now. Instead of thinking how beneficial the money would be to my boyfriend and I, or how empowered it would make me feel to not be sitting at home all the time, or how I'd finally have some sort of health insurance. It's not a good way to think about things, and I'd lost my motivation to try anything anymore because it gets to feeling like there are so many drawbacks to everything that none of them are worth doing. My parents weren't trying to make me think this way, they just wanted me to think of possible consequences to my actions. But it's resulted in me giving up several different career paths: massage therapy because of creepy guys wanting happy endings, veterinarian because I struggle with chemistry, ranching because raising animals is expensive, traveling to other countries because I could get raped or killed. You get the idea. Oh, so much point. Older people raising youth means you pick up some old people racism and ideals, as well as a general huffiness against anything silly. Not to mention general exclusion from the same events my classmates took part of, which just marks you as the weird kid that's reading Gone with the Wind, not playing Pokemon. Learning I was attracted to women was one problem. I had to justify to myself at one point in time that it was totally fine to date outside my race, let alone bringing her home the first time. I generally would be miserable to be around. I was brought up around grumpy old people, and I was a 21-year-old grumpy lady. It took a while to realize how I was acting, and most of it came about after I moved and started just living my life. I realized I liked silly things. I would find myself trying to prove the narrow-minded things I had learned, and was proven wrong time and time again, and my world opened up, and I have so much more love and happiness around me now. I'm far from perfect. I had a lot to unlearn, and even more, I'm sure. I still have a hard time saying things when they're on my mind, and can be very reserved and quiet, but I'm a big fan of the silly, now, and terrible jokes and puns and all the things I was taught to run my nose up at, because it was childish. The woman I'm seeing now is phenomenal. She doesn't always get the way I was brought up, and can be a few steps ahead of me, but she's great at letting me catch up at my own pace. That credit cards don't just have money on them magically. Watched my mother file bankruptcy 3 times because of it, and is in debt up to her eyeballs again because of credit cards. That black people are monkeys. And no, I'm not being mean when I say this, but I come from a very prejudiced family and was told many times that black people were either monkeys or they were made that way because God didn't like black people. It really pisses them off when my best friend is a black person. Being gay is a sin and wrong. That by a small child cutting flips, he would flip his liver and die. Yeah, I still haven't figured that one out. And my personal favorite, that you have to stay with your first love /in the sack /sech. My mother is 51 years old and still to this day is head over heels in love with my father, whom was her first love /in the sack. Yeah, they haven't been together in 30 or so years. My father married my stepmom, was with her for 26 years until she passed away last year. He has no feelings whatsoever for my mother, but she still loves him. But her raising myself and my sister like this lead to my sister marrying her first love /in the sack 3 days after he came out of rehab to avoid having a bastard baby because my sister was pregnant and unwed at the time. And they have been together for 10 years now. He beats her ass, does drugs, treat her like shit, and fucks around on her. But she loves him, and he is her first love, so she can't leave him. Yeah, I married my first in the sack when I was 17 years old because, well, that's what I thought I was supposed to do. I figured out after about 4 years that first love sheet was bullshit and spent the next 2.5 years working my way out of that faked up marriage. that it really was my mother causing the majority of the problems in the family, not my father, although he does have to take some blame. Growing up, my parents would have big arguments. When my sis and I were younger, they rarely involved us in the bedroom, door closed, etc. But as we got older, they'd spill out into the rest of the family. After almost every fight, my dad would leave for a little while, rarely more than an hour, usually for a long walk. During this time, while he was out of the house, my mom would essentially brainwash us kids into believing that it was something he did that caused the fight. As the years went by, my dad's ability to handle these fights got weaker and finally accumulated into him snapping while we were traveling and partially strangling me in anger, more at my mom, but directed towards me due to me doing something shortly before. Parents got a divorce shortly after. Us kids weren't part of the proceedings at all, although that's somewhat normal. Mother was given custody of us, with us pre/teens being allowed to choose when we wanted to spend time with my father. In the years after the divorce, my mother's ability to cause a fight turned from being directed towards my father to being directed towards me. Her and I had huge blow-ups. But being a kid, I then wasn't allowed to leave the house to cool down like my father did. I usually did anyways, sneaking out of a window or just straight storming past here and out the door, ignoring her screams. She enrolled me in anger management therapy, didn't do a thing, became very controlling over what I could and couldn't do /watch/read/ect in an attempt to quell my anger issues. As soon as I graduated from high school, after I was 18, I moved out and moved back in with my father. Him and I lived together for quite a few years and rarely had any arguments. Unlike living with my mother, where they were an almost weekly thing, my father introduced me to the notion that my mother has borderline personality disorder, which in the years since I've moved out and learned about it, it seems more and more obvious. My sister followed suit shortly after I left as well, for her changing high schools. Due to similar reasons, I'm going back to her place for Christmas and spending a week there. Will have to brace myself for inevitable fights that will happen. Point on a side note, with EBPD, that gladly neither of us kids picked up, namely because she started it after we left. But it bugs me every time we are visiting. My mom has taken to describing people based off from what mental disability she thinks they have. So if, say, she's talking about a coworker whom you can't quite picture in your head, and you inquire as to which one is Sue again, her response will be something like, "Oh, you remember Sue, she's the one with autism," when in fact that person doesn't have autism. Calm is not the word I would use for myself. Nevertheless, people usually ask me how I very rarely get angry, despite being born to a family of short-tempered people. First, I do not agree that anger is something you inherit. Second, whenever I feel angry, I remember how I felt as a child. Whenever my father would start one of his short-tempered fits, I felt diminished, humiliated, inhuman and embarrassed about myself. So much so that, when we had peaceful stretch of days, I used to get nervous as to when this will end, and with what mistake of mine. I always felt this was normal. When I reached an age, I realized that it is not so. So I decided never to make another human being feel the same. I learned to forgive and overlook human mistakes. I taught myself to be the thing I wished I had in another human being, a patient friend. Plus the horrendous sin of questioning the religious authorities. I have no issues with God, just with people who take his name to tell me what I should do with my life. A bunch of them are teachers, but will not admit to global issues looming over humanity. No, not climate change. In this part of Earth, it is population explosion. I felt disgusted with the misogynistic venom they spew out. Whenever I called them out on this, my parents attributed it to teenage hormones and had strict reprimands. This messed up my relationship with my faith for a long time. Now I realize my mistake was to let them define what my faith should be. I'm still a persona non grata amongst my relatives. Looking back, I don't think as a kid that I ever encountered the concept that people could have different jobs, even substantially different ones, over the course of their lives. My folks were from a generation where the first job you got, particularly if it was a professional one, pretty much dictated your career for life. I vaguely knew that my grandfather had been in the military for a short period, but counted it as an exception because the country had been at war, and when it was over he went back to doing what he'd done before. Pretty much everyone I'd been told about in the family had been described in the style of, and this is great uncle so and so, he was a baker. As in, he had been a baker for 40 years or so and then retired. Or a carpenter for 40 years, then retired. Or a company worker, then manager in the same company, for 40 years and then retired. The idea that someone could have one type of job, and then change to doing a completely different type of job later, much less have to job hop because of circumstance, simply wasn't in my head. It wasn't until I got out of university and was looking for work that a friend of the family suggested going into the public service purely as a temporary thing until I found something I really wanted to do. Of course, I ended up doing that for 15 years, so that kind of backfired. But the concept of going into a job which could be someone's permanent job, not just a temp or short-term job, without that necessarily being a life decision about your career, was something of a revelation. I was actually allowed to work at jobs which weren't on a direct path to what I wanted to be one day. Amazing.